There's a version of Quentin Tarantino that exists only in fragments. Half in interviews, half in the pauses between his sentences. At 63, he doesn't talk like someone winding down. He talks like someone curating an ending. Not just his final film. Not just his legacy. Everything. Including his funeral. He has always been unusually precise about conclusions. His films don't drift. They land. Hard. Decisive. Controlled. Whether it's a blood-soaked revenge arc or a quiet final shot that lingers just long enough, Tarantino has spent decades shaping how stories end. So when he begins to speak, carefully, almost casually, about death, about who belongs and who doesn't, it doesn't sound hypothetical. It sounds like direction. And somewhere inside those reflections is a quieter, more unsettling idea. There are people he would not want there. Not out of spectacle. Not out of revenge. But because, to Tarantino, presence means something very specific. It always has. He wasn't supposed to arrive the way he did. No film school pedigree. No traditional industry ladder. No carefully groomed path into Hollywood. Just a video store clerk in Manhattan Beach, absorbing cinema obsessively, building a mental archive of genre films, foreign imports, exploitation cinema. Stories most of Hollywood had already dismissed. That outsider status didn't just shape his taste. It shaped his relationships. From the beginning, Tarantino didn't operate within the system. He pushed against it. And when Reservoir Dogs arrived in 1992, it didn't feel like a debut. It felt like an intrusion. A filmmaker who didn't ask permission. By the time Pulp Fiction redefined independent cinema in 1994, Tarantino wasn't just successful. He was disruptive. He didn't follow narrative rules. He rearranged them. Dialogue became rhythm. Violence became punctuation. And people noticed. Not just audiences. People inside the industry. Some admired him. Some aligned with him. Others tolerated him. But even early on, there was a pattern forming. One that would repeat throughout his career. Tarantino didn't just collaborate. He immersed. And immersion, for him, often meant control. His sets were known for intensity. Not chaos, but precision. Actors weren't just performers. They were instruments inside a very specific vision. There was trust, but it was conditional. It depended on belief in the project, in the tone, in the execution. If you were inside that circle, you were part of something exacting, sometimes exhilarating. If you weren't, or if you pushed back too hard, the distance became visible. Over time, that dynamic created two parallel reputations. To some, Tarantino was fiercely loyal. He brought actors back. He built long-term creative relationships. He elevated careers. To others, he was immovable, stubborn, uncompromising to the point of strain. And those two realities didn't cancel each other out. They coexisted. By his 50s, Tarantino had already started talking about limits. A self-imposed cap. 10 films. Not because he couldn't continue, but because he didn't want to overstay. He spoke about filmmakers who lingered too long, whose later work diluted what came before. He didn't want that. Again. Control. Even in aging, even in decline, he wanted authorship. That mindset doesn't stop at filmography. It extends into everything. Including how he's remembered. Including who gets to stand near his name when he's no longer there to defend it. When people imagine funerals, they often imagine inclusion. Closure. A gathering of everyone who ever mattered. Tarantino doesn't think that way. For him, presence is not automatic. It's earned. Maintained. Sometimes, revoked. Because over the decades, not every relationship held. Some fractured publicly. Some quietly drifted. Some were complicated from the start. And some became something else entirely. Symbols of moments he doesn't necessarily want folded into the final narrative of his life. If you trace his career backward, you can almost map it through people. Certain names define certain eras. Early collaborators. Breakthrough partners. Actors who became synonymous with his work. Industry figures who helped elevate him. But not all of those names remain uncomplicated. And Tarantino, more than most, doesn't pretend they are. There's a difference between public diplomacy and private memory. In interviews, Tarantino can be generous, reflective, even forgiving in tone. But if you listen closely, there are edges, small shifts in phrasing, moments where he chooses distance over nostalgia. He rarely engages in outright public feuds. That's not his style. Instead, he reframes. He contextualizes. He tells stories in a way that places events exactly where he wants them. And what's left unsaid carries its own weight. At 63, Tarantino isn't just looking back. He's organizing. There's a reason he speaks about his final film with such clarity. There's a reason he resists the idea of continuing indefinitely. There's a reason he has already moved toward writing, toward other forms of storytelling that don't require the same collaborative intensity. He is reducing variables, simplifying the equation of his legacy. Because filmmaking, at his level, has always been relational. It depends on trust, alignment, shared purpose. And when those things fracture, the work becomes something else. Harder, more complicated, less controlled. So when he hints, directly or indirectly, that not everyone belongs at the end, it's not about grudges in the traditional sense. It's about narrative integrity, the same instinct that guides his films. Who belongs in the final scene? Who shaped the story in a way that aligns with how he wants it remembered? And who doesn't? There are names that inevitably surface when you begin asking those questions. People who were once central to his career. People whose relationships with him shifted, sometimes gradually, sometimes abruptly. People whose presence would complicate the image of unity that funerals often attempt to project. And Tarantino has never been particularly interested in projecting something that isn't true. What makes this more complicated is that none of these relationships exist in isolation. They are tied to broader contexts, industry systems, cultural debates, public controversies. They're not just personal disagreements. They're intersections of personality, power, and time. And Tarantino, whether intentionally or not, often finds himself at the center of those intersections. Because he doesn't avoid controversy. He engages with it. Sometimes directly, sometimes through his work. His films provoke. His interviews provoke. His perspectives on violence, on history, on representation, have all been questioned, debated, challenged. And with each challenge, relationships shift. Some deepen, others strain. Some never recover. So when the idea surfaces that there are people he wouldn't want at his funeral, it doesn't feel dramatic. It feels consistent, an extension of how he's always operated. Selective, intentional, controlled. But the real story isn't just that there are exclusions. It's who those exclusions might be. Because behind each name is a chapter, a collaboration, a conflict, a moment where alignment broke. And understanding those moments means understanding Tarantino, not just as a filmmaker, but as a person navigating decades of creative partnerships, public scrutiny, and evolving values. Some of those chapters involve power. Some involve trust. Some involve interpretation of art, of history, of responsibility. And some involve silence. By the time you reach this stage of a career, after decades of influence, success, and scrutiny, the question isn't just what you created. It's who stood beside you while you created it. And who didn't. Tarantino's answer to that question isn't simple. It never was. Because for every enduring collaboration, there's a counterpart that didn't last. For every story of loyalty, there's a moment of friction. And for every person who might stand at his funeral, there's someone who almost certainly won't. The reasons for that aren't abstract. They're specific, documented, layered, and they stretch across years of filmmaking, across shifting industry dynamics, across personal decisions that didn't always align with the people around him. To understand who might be absent, you have to understand why. And that means going back, not to the beginning, but to the fractures. The moments where collaboration turned complicated, where trust was tested, where artistic vision collided with personal reality. Because those moments didn't just shape his films. They shaped his relationships. And in some cases, they redefined them entirely. That's where the story moves next. Into the people. into the tensions. The most unavoidable name in that history is Harvey Weinstein. For years, Weinstein wasn't just a collaborator. He was infrastructure. Through Miramax and later the Weinstein Company, he distributed and financed many of Tarantino's most defining films. From Pulp Fiction to Inglourious Bastard, the partnership was deeply embedded in Tarantino's rise. And for a long time, that relationship looked functional, even mutually beneficial. Weinstein was known for aggressive distribution tactics, awards campaigns, and a willingness to push unconventional films into the mainstream. Tarantino, in turn, delivered films that were bold, commercially viable, and culturally dominant. But underneath that success was a reality that the industry would later confront directly. When the allegations against Weinstein became public in 2017, they didn't just expose one man, they forced a reckoning across Hollywood. And Tarantino was pulled into that reckoning in a way that was more personal than most. Because he admitted something specific. He knew more than he had acted on. In interviews, Tarantino acknowledged that his former partner, Mira Sorvino, had told him about Weinstein's behavior years earlier. He described it not as complete ignorance, but as partial awareness. Enough to understand there was misconduct, not enough, in his words, to grasp its full extent. That distinction didn't land cleanly. It raised a different question. What does responsibility look like when you're close to power? Tarantino's response, over time, has been one of regret. He has said plainly that he wishes he had done more, that he should have intervened, that inaction was a failure. But regret doesn't erase association. And that association complicates legacy. Because Weinstein's role in Tarantino's career is not incidental. It's foundational. So when you imagine a funeral, when you imagine who belongs in that final gathering, the absence becomes symbolic. Weinstein isn't just a person Tarantino distanced himself from. He represents a chapter of success tied to a system that later proved deeply flawed. And Tarantino, who values narrative control, may not want that chapter standing visibly beside the rest. Then there is Uma Thurman. If Weinstein represents institutional tension, Thurman represents something more personal. Their collaboration defined an era. Kill Bill wasn't just a project, it was a long-developed concept, something Tarantino and Thurman discussed years before it was made. She wasn't simply cast in the role of the bride, she helped shape it. That creative intimacy makes what happened later more complicated. During the filming of Kill Bill Volume 2, Thurman was involved in a car crash while performing a driving scene. For years, the details of that incident remained largely out of public view. Then, in 2018, Thurman spoke about it publicly. She described the crash as the result of being pressured to perform a stunt she didn't feel safe doing. She said she had expressed concerns about the condition of the road and the car, and that those concerns were dismissed. The footage of the crash, released later, showed the impact in stark terms. It wasn't minor. It was violent. Tarantino responded directly. He did not deny the incident. Instead, he called it one of the biggest regrets of my life. He stated that he believed the car was safe, that he would never have asked her to do something he thought would harm her. But intention and outcome are different things. And Thurman's framing of the event wasn't just about the crash. It was about trust. On a Tarantino set, where control is central, trust is the currency that allows actors to follow that vision. And in that moment, Thurman's trust was broken. Their relationship didn't collapse entirely. Over time, there have been signs of reconciliation, public appearances, mutual acknowledgement of their shared history. But reconciliation doesn't erase rupture. It reframes it. And when you consider the idea of a funeral, of who stands in that room, Thurman's presence becomes complicated not because of hostility, but because of history. Because she represents both one of Tarantino's greatest creative partnerships and one of its most painful incidents. The next tension isn't rooted in collaboration, but in interpretation. Between Tarantino and Spike Lee, the friction has never been hidden. It centers on language, on representation, and on authorship. Spike Lee has been openly critical of Tarantino's use of racial slurs in his films, particularly the repeated use of the N-word. For Lee, the issue isn't just frequency, it's authority. Who gets to use that language? In what context? And to what end? Tarantino's response has remained consistent over the years. He defends his writing as historically grounded, character-driven, and contextually accurate. He argues that removing or sanitizing that language would distort the reality he's trying to depict. It's not a disagreement that resolves easily, because it's not just about dialogue. It's about perspective. Lee's films approach race through a lived, cultural lens shaped by his own experiences and community. Tarantino approaches it as a writer reconstructing historical and fictional worlds with a specific tonal style. Those approaches don't align, and neither filmmaker has shown interest in softening their stance to accommodate the other. There's no dramatic fallout, no singular event that defines their tension. Instead, it's sustained disagreement, public, principled, unresolved. And that kind of tension doesn't fade into the background. It stays present. So when you think about presence at a funeral, not just physical presence, but symbolic inclusion, someone like Spike Lee represents a philosophical divide that was never bridged. Then there is the controversy surrounding Bruce Lee. But this one is different, because it extends beyond a single individual into legacy. In Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Tarantino included a depiction of Bruce Lee that was widely debated. The portrayal showed Lee as confident to the point of arrogance, engaging in a fictionalized confrontation with a stuntman character. For some viewers, it was harmless, stylized, consistent with the film's tone. For others, particularly those connected to Bruce Lee's legacy, it felt dismissive. Shannon Lee publicly criticized the portrayal, arguing that it reduced her father to a caricature and failed to respect his cultural and historical significance. Tarantino did not back down. He defended the scene, citing accounts from people who knew Bruce Lee and suggesting that the portrayal wasn't entirely fictional. He framed it as one interpretation among many, consistent with his approach to storytelling. Again, the issue isn't whether the scene is right or wrong. It's that it exists within a broader conversation about representation, authorship, and responsibility. And Tarantino, true to form, chose not to adjust his narrative to accommodate criticism, which reinforces a pattern. When confronted with opposition, he doesn't retreat. He clarifies. He defends. He continues. There are smaller tensions too, less public, less defined, but still present. Actors who didn't return, collaborators who drifted, industry figures who clashed with his approach to filmmaking. Not all of these are conflicts in the traditional sense. Some are simply misalignments. But over decades, those misalignments accumulate. They form a network of relationships that are not quite broken, but not quite intact either. What ties all of these moments together isn't hostility. It's friction. And that friction often comes from the same source: Tarantino's insistence on authorship. He doesn't dilute his vision to preserve relationships. He preserves his vision and accepts that relationships may change as a result. That's not inherently right or wrong, but it has consequences. Because filmmaking is collaborative by nature. Even the most controlled director depends on actors, producers, crews, people who bring their own perspectives, boundaries, and expectations. When those perspectives align, the result can be extraordinary. When they don't, the tension becomes part of the process. And sometimes, it extends beyond the process. So when you begin to map out the people who might not belong at his funeral, it's not a list built on grudges. It's a map of where alignment failed, where trust fractured, where interpretation diverged, where association became complicated. Each of these names, Weinstein, Thurman, Lee, the broader legacy of Bruce Lee, represents a different type of tension. Institutional, personal, philosophical, cultural, and together, they form a kind of negative space around Tarantino's career. Not the work itself, but the relationships that shaped, challenged, and sometimes disrupted that work. At 63, Tarantino is aware of all of it. Not in a defensive way, but in a curatorial one. Because when you've spent your life constructing narratives, you don't stop doing it when the cameras turn off. You apply it to your own story. And in that story, not every chapter gets equal weight. Not every character remains central. Some are redefined. Some are distanced. Some are left out entirely. Which brings the question back to where it started. Not just who he wouldn't want at his funeral, but what those exclusions mean. Because they're not just about people. They're about what parts of his life he considers essential, and what parts he doesn't want standing in the final frame. That's where the story turns inward. away from the conflicts themselves, and toward what they reveal. About loyalty, about control, about how someone like Tarantino defines meaning at the end of a life built on storytelling. By 63, the noise starts to thin out. Not all at once, but enough to notice. The urgency that once drove every decision begins to narrow into something more selective. For Quentin Tarantino, that shift is deliberate. He has already set the boundary. 10 films, no more. Not because he can't continue, but because he doesn't want to lose control of the ending. That instinct carries beyond filmmaking. It shapes how he thinks about legacy. A funeral, in simple terms, is where people gather to decide what someone meant. Different memories, different versions, all compressed into one space. But Tarantino has never left meaning to chance. He defines it. The people around him now reflect that change. His life has grown smaller, more private, centered on his wife, Daniela Pick, and their children. And inside that smaller world, loyalty isn't about history. It's about who remained. Because distance, over time, becomes its own kind of truth. Not every relationship breaks. Some just drift far enough that they no longer belong in the same frame. And Tarantino, more than most, understands what stays in the frame and what doesn't.